I want to tell you guys the basic tools that you need to start sewing clothes. Sometimes I know it can be a little intimidating, and I hope to take some of that away by telling you what you need. So let's look at the list. This is a list of the basic sewing tools. You'll need a sewing machine, fabric scissors, an iron and an ironing board, and a basic sewing kit. I'll link to these items down below in the description box. First things first, you'll want a sewing machine. You don't need anything fancy. This is like a quilting sewing machine and I sew garments on it. Just as a side note, if you plan on working with knit fabric, I recommend you get a walking foot. The reason that I suggest getting a walking foot when working with knit fabric is because it won't stretch out your fabric or create any wavy seams. You'll also want to make sure that you have fabric scissors, either to cut out your fabric or to trim threads along the way while you sew. Don't ever let anyone use this for anything besides fabric and thread. Guard it with your life. You'll probably use your scissors like all the time, but if you want, you can also get a rotary cutter and a mat, and these will actually expedite the whole cutting process, and it'll save your hand from a lot of the repetitive motion that can cause hand problems. So, is it necessary? Absolutely not. Is it helpful and useful? I like it. You may or may not be surprised by the fact that you're gonna have to iron while you sew. So, you're gonna need an iron and an ironing board. Why is that sticky? You'll want a basic sewing kit that will include your measuring tape, your seam ripper, probably a marking tool, and your pins. Whoa. You'll need to make sure that it's a flexible sewing tape measure. You need something that's going to be able to move and be flexible, and something that you can fit around your body because you're going to need to take your measurements. Yeah. Also, guys, mistakes happen whether we want them to or not, so we need seam rippers. Basically, you can stick these into your seam and it'll rip the thread up. That's why it's called a seam ripper, because you're ripping up your seam, and that'll actually help you take the piece apart so that you can sew it back together the right way this time. Most patterns have markings that you'll need to transfer from the pattern to the fabric. In order to do that, you'll need a marking tool. This is tailoring chalk. This is a fabric pen. And this one actually has disappearing ink, so I just put it on there and a few hours later it's gone. I really like the fabric pen because it's easier to use, but the tailoring chalk works really great too. They're both inexpensive, so you can just take your pick. Pins to hold your fabric in place. You can actually also use it to pin your pattern to your fabric so that you can cut it out and the pattern won't move. You can also use pattern weights. What it does is you put it on top of the pattern and it weighs it down so that the pattern won't move while you're cutting. So you have the option of either pins or pattern weights. Pattern weights are helpful, they're nice. I've actually also used my phone and my kids' toys and lots of other really random things as pattern weights. So these aren't actually necessary, but you can just use whatever you want. Pins will always have a place in sewing, but a lot of times you can actually use clips instead. In my opinion, clips actually make the process a little faster because I can just clamp instead of having to wiggle a pin. You may want to start with pins because you will need them, especially if you're doing appliques or lace or anything like that. However, I find that I use these most of the time. I like the basic sewing kit because it's a one-time purchase, but you get most of the items that you need. So I'm in favor of doing that over buying everything individually. As a recap, the tools that you need are a sewing machine, fabric scissors, an iron and an ironing board, and a basic sewing kit. The other optional tools that I mentioned in this video are a rotary cutter and a mat, pattern weights, and sewing clips. There's a few other things that are not tools that you're going to need in order to sew, and that's your fabric, your pattern, your thread, and any notions that your pattern might list. Are there lots of other tools that you could potentially get that would help? Probably, yeah, there's lots of stuff for sewing, but most of it isn't actually necessary to start. You just need these things. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it valuable. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe below. And then it weighs the pattern down so you don't have to cut it, and it just weighs the pattern down so that you don't have to, I'm done. I can't do this anymore.